Um, I'm Mathijs Dijkstra, as said. I'm a landscape architect, founder of MD Landscape Architects. And we've been done some research on this topic for a couple of years. Like we started 6 years ago, and we did it together with Bart Westerveen. I'm here today to talk to you about an approach we've recently started to develop that will hopefully allow us and others to make health a natural and undeniable part of landscape design and other forms of spatial design. We think that this approach will help not only designers but also clients and authorities and the public to gain more insight into what is a healthy landscape or spatial design and what the parameters and the means are that designers and involved parties can use to improve the positive effects of landscape on the health of people and other living beings. And before we even start, I'd like to stress that this is not a hippie fantasy about making everything healthy by making everything green, but this is a talk about putting health in the core of the landscape design where it belongs. And I will start by talking short about the historical connection between health and garden design. There's thought a lot about it the last 2 days, so I will be short. Following that, I will explain a bit more about our health-related landscape work and research in the recent years, and our journey to get a grasp on implementing health in urban design and rural design. And then we get to the main course, which was our discovery of Mathijs Dijkstra's dynamic concept of health and what we think that we can do with that, and we are all the designers. The connection between landscape design and health almost goes without saying. So landscape design has its historical roots in the garden design, and garden design in cultures ranging from China, Persia, and our Western society has always been based on interrelated concepts of mental and bodily health, cultural and spiritual identity, and our relation to other people and living beings. And the rise in Western society of landscape and city design itself can even be seen as a direct result of industrialization and the ensuing social revolution. The rise of garden cities, public parks, green incorporated in neighborhoods and parkways as a healthy alternative or counterbalance against the worker slums. Of course, one might ask if landscape design and health are so historically interwoven and synonymous, why bother about an approach for healthy landscape design? Isn't landscape design by definition healthy? Well, yes, at least it should be. And the start of landscape architecture in the beginning of the 20th century could be argued to be part of a defensively strategy, prompted by a very obvious social health issues. It could be claimed that because of the success of this strategy and the incorporation of landscape design and other spatial design in our planning process, that health as a goal of a landscape has become less obvious, but not therefore less necessary. And since the Industrial Revolution and the ensuing social revolutions and reformations, the world's grown much more complex, and so have our definitions, understandings, and ideas about health and design, while at the same time the oversimplified post-industrialization image of what is healthy space is still persistent in our mind. Green is healthy. When confronted with a 19th century Blackpool slum and a well-wind garden city, it's easy to see which one is the healthier option to raise your kids. But nowadays, the green countryside isn't necessarily the healthier alternative to the city at all. The problem is you can't immediately see it when you go there. You're more likely to see it in the statistics. But people don't act upon statistic treats. They act upon visual impulse and by imitation and habit. So the main question is, how can we get a grip on the matter of healthy spatial design when the difference between what we perceive and the knowledge and what is the reality in relation to healthy design is so huge and multi-layered? In other words, the health goal of landscape design may be less apparent than it once was, but in essence, it has not diminished at all. The present-day world has changed its demands, not defensive strategy, but a proactive promoting of health through spatial design. The focus of our designs has always been on simplicity in design, reducing multi-layered problems to simple solutions, by making use of what's already there, changing as little as possible while at the same time reaching for maximal effect in the way people use and perceive their spatial surroundings, almost naturally. This drive for simplicity has gradually incorporated the focus on healthy design as well. This culminated in a study in 2011 at the UNCG Hospital with movement scientist Simone Cogliao, who's also speaking at this event, about the implementation of spatial and other means to get people to practice more everyday physical activity. That led to a further collaboration with her research group, which eventually led to Healthy City, a multidisciplinary realistic approach on how to redesign cities in such a way that inhabitants will be naturally inclined to choose the healthiest option of transport, as we talk today, such as walking, cycling, and incorporate daily motion more actively and naturally in their everyday lives. The body of thought of the Healthy City was, for instance, used in the policy document of the Department of Education, Culture, Sports and Wellbeing in Groningen, and also it was used as the base of the integralic realistic vision of Groningen as a wholly energetically neutral city, which we developed together with Specht Architects, Marcia, and the municipality architect of Groningen for the International Architecture Biennale 2016 in Rotterdam, which is still to be visited. The concept of the Healthy City is built around three interrelated fields of influence: culture, structure, and climate. It offers a holistic view on health and inciting change in behavior, but allows for small steps at one day at a time approach. And the Healthy City creates a network that links existing green and reactivates all the green layers. It connects the functional aspects of parks with physical and mental health, and green is a part of the cleaning mechanism of the organism city. The integrality and flexibility of the Healthy City makes use of the density of cities. It's an effective tool for the healthy upgrade of cities, but it's not easily translatable to and implementable in rural areas, precisely the areas where health and lack of everyday physical activity really is a problem, precisely the area that still looks and feels healthy in our collective minds, and precisely the areas where a large portion of our works come from. And for a while we struggled to adapt the Healthy City concept to rural areas in various ways, but the lack of density in rural areas time and again proves to create barrier for even a conceptually sound adaptation of the Healthy City principles. So for rural areas, or for any area without a certain level of density, we needed another approach. In the recent laboratory workshop, Healthy Living Lab Dokkum, we developed, together with Jan Bleker of the Northern Netherlands Area Health Authority and urban planner Sandra van Assen, an integrative strategy for Dokkum and its surroundings area. We designate 4 parameters of health: physical health, mental health, social health, and spatial health, and we presented the participation policymakers with a number of possible interventions, strategies, and actions. Together with the participants, we developed this further and researched which interventions were most preferable and how they could be most effective in all 4 parameters of health. And the ultimate goal of the laboratory was to create awareness on how thinking about health solutions can be integrated with thinking about design solutions for a village and its surroundings. If you want to know more, there's a workshop at the end of the day. Now, this was more in the direction we needed to go in finding an effective approach for healthy landscape design. We wanted to further develop and formalize this approach. In order to do so, we needed to be comprehensive, universally workable, and scientifically sound. We needed to distinguish clearly between goal and means. So we needed to place man and human health central, instead of landscape and its possibilities and qualities. And thirdly, we needed to be as universally understandable as possible in order to be able to communicate with many different disciplines and groups of people. With Healthy Living Lab Dokkum, we'd already been using Mathijs Dijkstra's intriguing and refreshing concept of health and its diagram of 6 dimensions of positive health. But now we took a step back and realized the diagram provided us with exactly what we need. The diagram was no longer just input, but the core of what we were looking for. Let me shortly explain the diagram first, and then what is so great about it and what we were using it for. This diagram names 6 so-called dimensions of health: bodily functions, mental functions, spiritual existential dimension, social participation, daily functioning, and quality of life. Machteld and her work group developed this diagram to be used by people to assess their own perceived state of health in relation to these dimensions, for instance by giving them a rate between 1 and 10. But what is so great about this diagram for us designers, apart from its own qualities in the field of health? Now, first of all, it's comprehensive, universally workable, and scientifically sound. And it provides us with a clear goal. It places human experience of health central, and that's the goal now. It's up to us to provide the means. And certainly, it's very understandable and an excellent means of communication with many different disciplines and groups of people. But there's more. The 6 dimensions are interrelated and juxtaposed, and therefore mutually strengthened. When you fill in this diagram for yourself, you'll find that it invites you to look on what you do have rather than what you don't have, just by giving you a variety of points to consider. It makes overall health something to strive for instead of a minimum requirement. And this is a very useful quality in our discipline and easily translatable to the larger picture of any given area. Furthermore, the diagram is holistic, but not conditional, and extremely flexible. It provides you with possibilities and not with limitations. Lastly, the diagram, quite logically, is not conditional in terms of scale. It works on any scale. Moreover, it invites you to look in a different way at the scale of the goal area. What does work in what place? Up to what point? And which dimension works on the scale of the whole? Which dimension on the smaller of the greater scale? What dimensions makes a logical link with the surroundings of the area? When looking through the lens of the 6th dimension, it becomes clear that an area works on many scales that are not bound by its established borders. These qualities makes the diagram an extremely versatile and useful tool for us. In essence, it's a communication tool. But as such, it can be used as a means of setting goals for ourselves and together with the clients, for instance, in developing a statement of requirements. It can be used as means of defining a common goal among various stakeholders, a means of communicating and working together with inhabitants, and a means to involve other parties in the development process. So how have we started using the tool? Ja, dat gaat net lukken, denk ik. We started with testing if we could actually attach landscape and spatial goals to the 6 dimensions. That proved very well possible. Without even striving to be complete, it's fairly easy to come up with a set of realistic landscape and spatial goals for every one of the 6 dimensions. For instance, attached to Yuba's dimension bodily functions, it's quite logical to formulate goals that optimally support these bodily functions, like clean air, clean water, opportunities for everyday physical activity, and so forth. Likewise, for daily functioning, landscape goals will be public infrastructure, accessible surroundings, including for the elderly, the vicinity of education, recreation, and facilities. Attached to the more abstract dimension like mental functions and perceptions are landscape goals like a clear designation of someone's own place in the world, natural transitions between public and private, oversight, and so forth. For social participation, goals will include formal and informal hangouts, social cohesion and visual relationships, a relationship between one's perceived identity and one's surroundings. And for the spiritual and existential dimension, goals will include a sense of ownership and responsibility, or room for initiatives. And lastly, for quality of life, goals include the perceived abundance of landscape and alternation between stimuli and serenity. And I'd like to stress that these landscape goals are in no way exhaustive and are still under debate among ourselves. And the precise formulation and use is still to be tested in the practice. The point here is that it's possible and useful to attach these landscape goals to the 6 dimensions. And the next step was to attach landscape means to landscape goals. And this is at the moment purely a thought experiment. The point here was first of all the question whether if it's all possible to come up with a number of realistic means. And the answer is yes. But even more than the goals, the landscape means only become meaningful in a real situation. So this is only an example of means for bodily functions. But what immediately becomes clear by doing the thought experiment is the range of other disciplines and collaborations that might be attached to a project to achieve a certain goal. It's absolutely not necessary to strictly think in terms of landscape means. Thinking outside these boundaries will even improve the quality and effectiveness of a landscape solution. A realization process that makes use of Hubert Mathijs' diagram might run as follows. Forming of ideas with the stakeholders and the clients using the landscape goals, and then developing the strategy using the landscape goals and the means, and then developing a statement of requirements, and at the end we start with the design and it will go round again. To be absolutely clear, we've just started discovering the possibilities of Hubert diagram. We can't wait to be making a start with making the translation to real development and design processes. We actually expect the possibilities to become more. What Huber is doing in science, what we have done so far is making use of that science. But it is not itself science, or it should, or does it as yet need to be. But we do want scientific backing on a number of our assumptions and plan to pick up collaboration in the scientific field and explore and develop our knowledge. When looking at Huber's diagram with the eye of a landscape designer, the historical connection between garden design and the health becomes again apparent. Gardens have, depending on a cultural interest, always had goals that can be related directly to one or more of Huber's 6 dimensions. It doesn't provide us with an overall solution like Healthy Cities does, nor with a universal implementable toolkit. It does something much better. It provides us with a way of looking what we've got and implementing change by making clear what is immediately possible. But most importantly, her diagram invites us to redefine ourselves as designers. And people are extremely good at adaptation to circumstances. That's one of the reasons why people tend to accept the immediate surroundings as they are. They might briefly resist change, but then it's business as usual. Instead of seeing their surroundings as something that they can and should influence and adapt and improve continuously. Huber's diagram invites us to do just that, to see landscape as ours and as a key motivator and means to improve our lives. My closing statement may be old news to the health specialists among you, but it occurred to me, while considering Huber's diagram, that there is actually no absolute upper limit to health. It might sound strange to think about health as something we can infinitely improve, but the opposite sounds even stranger, that there is a line we can draw that says this is the absolute summit of health. So I think it's a great thing to think about health, and happiness too, for that matter, as endlessly improvable. And I think it's a worthwhile goal to strive to do so. And for my part, that is the time that we start to think in the same way about our surroundings as something worthy to the best possible care we can give.